How's it going, friends? This video is going to be a priceless value, so do two things. Make sure to keep your eyes peeled and, above all, enjoy this class, because it's going to make your chess level improve significantly. We're going to take a detailed look at a game played by Gary Kasparov with the black pieces. His opponent, Piggott. The most important thing about this specific class is that we're going to truly understand how to play one of the very best defenses with the black pieces. We're talking about the King's Indian defense. I absolutely love this defense, and when you finish watching this video, I assure you it's going to become one of your favorites. In my personal opinion, it's becoming my favorite for facing the queen's pawn. I'm going to explain the ideas, exactly how to handle them, and all the essential details you need to be able to face a game using this opening. White plays with knight f3. The good thing about this defense is that white can really play whatever they want, and we're more or less always going to play practically the same thing. We'll start by fianchettoing our bishop. This is our main plan, okay? Normally, when the white pieces start with the queen's pawn, they also tend to use the queen's bishop pawn to place it next to it, that is, d4 and c4. So it's always usually a good idea to place this bishop in the fianchetto that goes from the h8 square to the a1 square because the d4 pawn is quote unquote weak. Let me explain. The c pawn, having advanced, has stopped defending this d4 pawn, and it's only going to be able to be defended by the e pawn. And I'll tell you something else. Normally in the King's Indian, the most dangerous thing for the black pieces is that they also advance this pawn to e4 in such a way that the d4 pawn is always going to be a weakness. The game in this case continued in the following way. Knight c3, white is playing perfectly well and castling on the part of black. Here we've already achieved our first task. Fianchettoing our bishop and castling short. You're going to have to do this in every game. See how it's quite simple? Actually, you can also use this plan with the white pieces. Instead of being called the King's Indian defense, it would be called the King's Indian attack. Something you must keep in mind, and this is very important to memorize, is that when they play the move e4, which they should do because we're leaving the whole center to our opponent, they should take advantage of it with the pawns. We must play the move d6 no matter what. Most of you already know this, but it's of extreme importance. If we don't do it, they're going to play e5 and they're going to kick out this knight and it'll always be poorly placed. In this case, playing d6, it wouldn't be a good idea anymore to advance to e5 because then all we'd have to do would be to make the exchanges, I'll show you here, pawn takes pawn and pawn takes pawn, and then we could exchange queens. If they don't want to lose the right to castle, they should take with the knight. And as you can see, this position is much better for black than for white. Let's play, for example, knight g4. We're threatening this pawn with two pieces, we were better in development, this bishop is coming out, we're already castled, and our opponent is going to have a very hard time. If instead of taking with the knight, he takes with the king, this move is even stronger because it attacks with a fork. You see it here, on this f2 square, and also, logically, it attacks this point that we're definitely going to win back. So we come to a conclusion. Let's put this back the way it was. When white plays this e4 right here, we must play d6 no matter what. And we're not afraid now of them advancing to e5 because after the exchanges, we trade queens and we're left in a better middle game or endgame. This is extremely important. You must always think a bit long term, not just think about what will happen in the next few moves, but how we're going to end up in the position. You know, as I always tell you, that in chess there are three phases of the game: the opening, the middle game, and the end game. And we must control all three and think between them so we don't end up lost later, okay? Alright, in this game, for example, the most main variation of all was played, and this is what I love about studying these types of games. Obviously, the opponent with the white pieces has 2600 elo and defends himself wonderfully. The thing is, we usually play against players who are inferior, and by quite a bit to this type of opponent. So, you know why? They won't defend themselves as well. It'll be even easier for us to win the game. Now we have everything ready here. We've made our, let's say, initial piece setup. And this is where many people get lost. Don't worry, let's think about something. When you have this, does white want a castle short or long? I can already see they want a castle short, right? If they had developed this bishop and this queen to castle long, then it would be very clear. If they castle short, we want to push the e5 pawn. If they castle long, we want to push the c5 pawn, and this is of vital importance. I'm going to give you a little trick. Pawn chains, pay attention to this, okay? This, for example, would be a pawn chain, see? They give us clues as to where our attack is going to be directed. We want to attack the king because in the king's Indian, we want to mate our opponent, just like you hear it. Deliver checkmate. If we have to sacrifice a piece, we're going to do it along the way. Because our goal isn't just to end up in a slightly better endgame, no, it's to deliver checkmate, okay? So if they're gonna castle kingside, which is what we're seeing in this game, that they'll castle kingside, we're going to launch this e5 so that our pawn chain points toward the king. If they were to castle queenside, our pawn chain would also point toward the king. This is much more important than you think, and you'll see in a moment that it's gonna be exactly as I'm telling you. Alright, question number one. Chess teacher, aren't you giving away the e5 pawn here? Shouldn't we first play a move like knight bd7 or knight c6 to defend the e5 point? Now, it would be a slight inaccuracy, let's put it that way. If we play knight c6, it's true we put good pressure on d4, but they could play this pawn here directly and harass our knight. If we play knight bd7, we're actually being a bit passive and we're not threatening anything yet. Even if it's a good move, we'll prefer to develop this knight via c6 to later, subsequently, bring it to e7. This order will work very well for you in games, so remember one thing. Whenever you can, try to play the knight via c6. Therefore, okay, chess teacher, tell me why you're not giving away the pawn here, why you're doing it immediately. Well, for you, if white decided to capture this pawn, after the exchanges, obviously here they should exchange queens first, because otherwise it would be exactly the same, but worse, because we would exchange and push one of the two pieces back, therefore they must exchange queens, and now we simply only have to wait to see if they take the pawn or not. If they've entered this variation, obviously they're going to take the pawn we just quote unquote gave away, because if you look closely, if they haven't ended up very badly, they've offered us the whole file. This bishop will come out, and this position is much better for black. So what happens if they take this pawn? Well, the good thing about this fianchetto bishop is that we can always jump with this knight to win it back. Therefore, a move like knight takes e4 would already be winning back the pawn. If they capture our knight, we'll capture theirs. And if they retreat the knight, we could, for example, play knight takes knight. We'd double these pawns, and thinking about an endgame again, we'd be in a strategically won endgame because our opponent, let's put it like this for example, would have these two pawns that are super easy to attack because they're isolated and doubled, and we simply have two pawn islands that are very well placed, and without any kind of problem. Therefore, already thinking about a possible endgame, we would enter a one endgame. Look how interesting this is that we're talking about, right? Let's put these pieces back as they were. This one was over here, and this knight had developed over here. Perfect, so we can play e5 immediately. They can't take us. In this case, what they did was castle, the most fundamental move of all. Kasparov here understood the king's Indian really well. Honestly, he was a true genius, and he played the move knight c6. If you've been paying attention to my explanations, you'll understand this move. Chess teacher, isn't this move a bit weird? They play d5 and kick out this knight. That's what we want. Here we have two options. Either take here, okay, and play these types of positions, where now our goal will be to place the rook on the file and play an open position. Or what I like most, without any doubt, is to play knight c6, precisely to force this type of advance. Not advancing would be very dangerous for white because this point would be heavily attacked and also indirectly by this bishop. Remember how dangerous that was? And then there would surely be very dangerous knight takes e4 moves, so they must advance. And this is the most thrilling thing about the King's Indian. They box us in, and we want to go with our knight to e7. Do you remember this? Knight c6, knight e7. Super important. We are redirecting towards a spectacularly thrilling middle game. It's also very important to properly evaluate the middle game plans. By the way, before I forget, you're thanking me for the Academy. You're welcome, friends. The truth is, we've built the Academy with great enthusiasm so you can improve, but for real, in chess. So you improve openings, middle game, end games, calculation, and strategy. Whoever's in the Academy improves for sure. I'll leave it here below in the description. When you finish the video, go check it out if you haven't given it a chance yet. Pay attention to the plan for the black pieces. Where's the pawn chain pointer? Towards the king. But watch out, because white is also going to have a very strong attack on the queen side. King's Indian games. Okay. You should know that they're going to be decided by an attack. Either the black attack or the white attack. Okay? Which is the more powerful attack of the two? The black one. But if we aren't able to successfully manage to checkmate, then in the long run, when we start considering an endgame, this space advantage white has on the queen side will end up deciding the outcome of the game. Therefore, we have to go for checkmate and we have to go for it fast, and you'll see that it's going to fascinate you. The game continues in the following way. Knight e1, a very clever technique to defend against this attack that will come on the king side. You'll see that if your opponent keeps the knight around here, they'll have a very hard time defending it. Don't worry, because few people will know how to make these kinds of effective defensive maneuvers. What is our plan now? Move this knight away. Very simple. We want to push this pawn forward here. We want to use the pawns to attack the opponent's king. See how he's a bit cramped for space? Let's go after him. A very important strategic theme to memorize in the King's Indian. We don't want them to trade off this bishop. This bishop is extremely powerful, because this bishop will often end up being sacrificed on h3 to open the position and deliver mate. If they trade this bishop, we're going to be in trouble. So if you're offered a trade of light squared bishops at any point, you shouldn't accept it. Got it? Very important. The game continues with bishop e3, a fabulous maneuver by white. You can see that Garry Kasparov's opponent playing white was an extremely strong player, right? What was the plan? Well, to play f3 and put this bishop over here. So this bishop not only defends, but also attacks toward the queen side. White's counterattack option is to try and break through on the queen side, right? Makes sense, right? See how the pawn chain also tells white which way they should attack? You'll always find this in your own games. The game indeed continues with f5. That's exactly what we wanted to play. There's no doubt about it. If you don't see that f5 as the move here, you haven't understood the game plan. 3, I just mentioned the idea, right? It not only holds the center, but also gives the bishop space to keep defending and attacking. A very good move. Look at what Kasparov does here. He keeps pushing his pawns. The idea is clear, right? We want to go for checkmate. We're going to launch our pawns to checkmate the white king. On their own, they won't do much, but once we push further, we'll bring in the knights, the queen, the bishop, and try to mate. Often, we'd actually love to trade. For example, this dark squared bishop for this one. We'd like that because this bishop is sometimes a bit clumsy and gets stuck here, trapped behind our own pawn chain. The game logically continues with bishop f2, and now, well, Kasparov doesn't hesitate for a single second. He continues his attack. You should know that you shouldn't waste time around here. Personally, I've won many games because my opponent didn't know how to react quickly on the queen side. They stayed making normal, developing moves that weren't useful, and then my attack came so fast, they couldn't do anything. It can happen to you, okay? You're gonna have to practice it. If you want more videos on the King's Indian, all you have to do is let me know in the comments, okay? If I see that many people ask for more videos on this defense, we'll bring it back and explain more things and see more examples to implement in your games, because it's one of my favorites and it's very unique. Alright, so if we attack over here, white has to attack over here. They're both doing it fabulously well. And now what? So we move the knights to the king side, knight f6 from Kasparov, and watch out because here they're already launching with the typical c5 break. See it? It's the typical break attack on Kasparov's base. Here, at some point, you can put a lot of pressure with the knights. This point right here, with this knight and the other one. Also, in some types of circumstances, you can advance this pawn to cause quite a bit of havoc in the black position. So as you can see, white, logically, if they play perfectly, also has their counterplay. And then it's simply a battle to see who gets there first. But as I'm telling you, most opponents, especially if you play below 2000, 2100 elo, without a doubt, they don't know how to react correctly. Perfect. How does Kasparov continue here after this break? Do we want to capture? Never in our lives do we want to capture. No, because if we capture, we're benefiting our opponent. These two pawns would be very strong, and besides this structure would get weaker and weaker, especially the e5 pawn, which no longer has anyone to defend it. Therefore, no, we never want to capture here. In fact, we want them to capture us, because that way they won't have the same pressure anymore. So, what do we do here? Nothing, we stick to our plan. The knight jumps to the other side, not just to join the attack, but because our opponent at some point can pressure the c7 point as well, with the rooks, with the knight, okay? And a very typical defensive maneuver that you can implement in your games is this rook f7. The rook from the second rank correctly defends the entire position. So, well, this move also serves to clear the way for the rook. Besides, logically, going to attack with the knights, right? Pawn takes pawn, maybe this move isn't the most precise in the world, because this tension is favorable for the white pieces. Since we can't capture, huh? This is very easy. I'm going to explain what a favorable tension is so that you can all understand it. A tension, you understand what that is, right? Two pawns that are touching and both can capture. Who's it favorable for? Well, it's favorable for white. Why? Because black can never capture, because they'd be in a bad spot. So only white has it in their hands to decide if they want to wait, if they want to capture, if they want to advance. Once they take, they're defining the tension. So we simply take with the pawn, very importantly with the pawn, to keep our pawn structure strong. And then here our problems are over. Rook c2, they want to enter through c7, Kasparov's maneuver rook f7. You understand this maneuver, right? I just explained it. And white continues on the queen side. Come on, don't tell me it doesn't all make a lot of sense. Black is attacking on the king side, white on the queen side. Exactly, as I've explained to you. Bishop f8. A very interesting move with several purposes. First of all, he's moving the bishop aside so it doesn't block the entry of the pieces. Also, he's defending the base of the chain, which is the most vulnerable point, with the bishop and with the queen. This point could be attacked with quite a bit of force. Therefore, bishop f8 is a multifunctional move, and hard to see. You don't really need to memorize moves, you just need to grasp the ideas. And then, it's true that we can study Kasparov's moves to understand these ideas and apply them in our games. But obviously, there were maybe 20 moves that were good in the position, right? You just have to understand the plan that Kasparov was using. Here we go. Well, the game continues with a 5, a super logical move. Bishop d7, the bishop is developed, taking advantage of the white squares since the pawns are on black squares, and this bishop now roams freely through these white squares here. And above all, the bishop gets off this open file, even at some point knowing that the light squared bishop is so important to us. They could even sacrifice the rook for the bishop, and it wouldn't be a bad idea. So on d7, it's more than well placed. It also lets this rook through to the attack. Often, we have so much space here on the king side behind our pawns that we can bring both rooks and the queen to attack on the king side. The game continues with this move here, knight b5. Would it be a good move to do bishop takes knight? A normal piece exchange, right? Well, it would be a monumental mistake, and I'm sure all of you have understood that. We'd be giving up our light squared bishop, which is our lethal weapon. What do we have to do? Continue with the attack. For example, what moves would be available here? Well, we could do, for example, a 5 would be possible, yes, but even more direct to play g4 directly, right? Why? Because we can really break through here now. If they take, it would be a bad idea because we're opening all the lines and we're really gonna checkmate the king. Therefore, logically, taking is not a good option. But be careful, because as we said, white also has its reaction on the queen's side. They're threatening a rook. What's more important? Moving this rook or going for checkmate? While in this case, it's much, much more important to go for checkmate. Sometimes you have to assess if the position is dynamic or static. Do you know what that means? A dynamic position means that whoever is faster to win will win. Well, that sounded very redundant, didn't it? Whoever is faster to mate the opponent, for example. In this case, the position is super dynamic. If we give too much time, our opponent will take everything, and in the end, we won't get the mate. So we need to go for the mate no matter what. You should know one thing, we're always going to have an advantage on this flank, always. No matter what they do, we're going to have an advantage. Therefore, as long as they let us, let's go for it. They're attacking the least important piece in the position. The rook on a8 to join the attack is the one that has it the hardest. Look at everything we'd have to move for it to join the attack, right? And the position requires being dynamic, okay? So here, look at what Kasparov does with very good judgment. It's carefully placing the pawn on g3. It's absolutely attacking the position beautifully. Look at the pawn chain that the black side has positioned right now. Would it be a good idea to capture? No, it would be a very bad idea to open lines. The most natural reaction, and the one that usually comes, is the move h3. But the move h3 wouldn't work now either, because we could simply play g times f2, winning this bishop, and really, even if they capture the rook later, it would be 2 pieces for a rook, and our attack would keep coming strong, right? Therefore, here, white captures the rook. It must also be said that they were threatening to enter with the knight through here in a very significant way. Surely at some point we should have given up this light squared bishop, even if just for a pawn. Logically, in this case, in this position, they definitely prefer to capture the rook, as they'll have a large material advantage. Should we capture this bishop route? Well, maybe it wouldn't be the best idea, and I'll explain why. Do we want to have a material advantage? That's not the priority. Delivering mate is. And if we come through here, they capture with the rook and everything's well defended. So let's make slightly better moves. Let's do something much superior. Enter with the knight into the attack. Not just to enter with the knight, but to make way for the queen. As you can see, we're threatening mate in one, right? So you have to be very careful here. It seems that white is already lost here, because if they move the bishop, for example, over here, mate is inevitable, and if they advance this pawn, we blast it with the bishop, and this seems unsalvageable. In most positions, I assure you, if you play these types of attacks well, they can't be saved for the white pieces. That said, this player with the white pieces was so good that he found a defense. He moves the king. With what idea? Well, with the idea that now we can't do much. If we come with the queen through here, they defend everything, and if we capture, the bishop comes back here, and this pawn bothers us. We can't keep attacking because it's in the way, so we've simply won a pawn, but we can't keep attacking, and remember, we're down a rook. Therefore, would it be a good idea now to capture this, to play the queen into the attack? No, it would be a bad idea. However, here Kasparov performed a beautiful maneuver. Pawn takes bishop, not to win a bishop, but because now, when the rook recaptures this pawn, white has a wonderful move. The knight jumps to g3, giving check. Can it be capture? No, you can't take this knight, because then the pawn would follow, then queen to h4, and it would be an unavoidable mate. So this knight can't be captured, the king must move. How does the game continue? Well, look, now that Kasparov has a bishop for a rook, he recovers this knight and now has 2 pieces for the rook. So, white no longer has extra material, they no longer have the material advantage, and our attack remains devastating. The bishop improves, and Kasparov realizes there's a very vulnerable dark square diagonal here. So he plays this wonderful move, a6, so that now the queen can come out via a7 and start exploiting these very weak dark squares. Queen to d3, queen to a7, pinning this rook, and look at this final blow that's going to fascinate you. White advances the pawn, and now Kasparov wins the game with a lethal combination. Pay attention because this will fascinate you. Pawn takes pawn might seem like a totally normal move, right? Bishop takes. But now, after these exchanges, this exchange was crucial so the pawn couldn't trap the queen. Once these exchanges are made, watch this masterstroke. Knight to h1, and white resigned. What a move, right? Impressive. I'll explain why this move leads to resignation. If they take the knight, we'll take the rook, creating many threats here with the knight, rook, and bishop, and above all, a material advantage. We would have a completely clean extra piece. They wouldn't be able to do anything. They can't take the knight. If they move away, we deliver, mate, though they don't have to move because it's useless, right? It's just to get out of the pin. And the rook can't move because if it does, it would simply be an illegal move. So what happens, for example, if they defend with the queen? Well then, knight takes rook, we trade everything, and we have an endgame with a material advantage. Also looking at and connecting with the endgame and calculation. So you must start studying all parts of the game. Study them well if you want to improve extremely quickly in chess, and also, obviously, strategy, as this class has had a lot of strategy. As you know, you have absolutely everything in the academy. My classes with titled masters, also with their PGN, so you can review the lesson. More than 60 opening courses. You choose the one you want to play, for example, the King's Indian, and you study it thoroughly, all the lines. You can practice them, see model games. You have middle game exercises to see who's better, end game exercises. You have absolutely everything in the academy, I assure you. So, my personal and most sincere recommendation in the world is that you try training for even just 1 month in the academy, and you'll see that you're going to notice a lot of results. I hope you guys really loved this video. Give it a thumbs up if you really did. And tomorrow, as always, I'll see you in the next video, guys. Bye!